To have come from Sydney and arrive in London, we've got so much going on, it was just mind-blowing. I know that I continued my art career by working in art studios by day and going to St Martin's in the Field by night and studying there. To this day, I can't really distinctly remember why I left such a well-paid art job to chuck it all in, to be a full-time musician. I'd written, I don't know, a handful of songs. I would think that the turning point was probably when I hooked up with these naughty American boys. And as it turns out, I was living in a building where everybody was stoned all the time, and I was the only goody two-shoes in the whole building that had never done drugs. So one night I'm sound asleep in bed, and there's this commotion going on downstairs, and there are like 6 uniformed bobbies, 2 sniffer dogs and 2 narcs, and they're just busting every little bed set in the whole building. They couldn't arrest me for drug possession, but they could have me deported. So I hit the road, and that's when I became a penniless bum. Excuse me while I kiss this guy. It would have been close to a year of just me standing out on the Autobahn with my thumb out and going all over Europe, sleeping in farmers' barns in France. I slept in Copenhagen railway station and all kinds of romantic things. To some people it might sound terrible. To me, it was like one of the happiest periods of my life. So I got to Berlin yet again, and it was at the onset of winter. I'd been trying to write to my father to tell him I was in dire straits, and I was getting no response at all. So ostensibly, I was all alone in the world. I mean, I'm, homeless, stateless, everything. And I had this particular night in Berlin, and I just thought, oh man, this is it. So the next day, I went to the Australian military mission in Berlin, and there was a woman there called Gisela. Then she told me that she lived in the commune in this place called Klausner Platz in Berlin. She wanted to take me around there, and that's where I met Falk. And Falk was fascinated with me as a songwriter. After a period of time, I started to feel guilty again. There's a job for a gardener going to the British Embassy. And I'm babbling on to Falk about how great it is I've got this job. And he just gave me this sour look and he said, you said you are a songwriter. Songwriters write songs. They don't work in gardens. And it was such a great thing he did for me.
Were you racked by self-doubt, or did you know, I'm good at this?
I didn't really care. It meant a lot to me what Falker and the other people directly around me thought. And as I said, I think at that stage there was 5 of us living in this commune. The world at large didn't matter so much at that stage. I was always pretty chuffed when they'd always go, that's fantastic,
You become part of this band, Sop with Camel. You're offered a recording contract, but it all falls over.
Yeah, which is all a bit. I mean, it was a bit tragic, but it was like black humour as well. I mean, that was my first sojourn into the record industry, and we went down to Munich to actually sign the deal, and we're told that, unfortunately, one of the biggest bands in the States at that time was called Sop with Camel, who was signed to United Artists. They'd said they were going to sue our ass. So
how did they come up with the same name?
How did we come up with the same name?
Well, either of you.
I'm sure I probably would have thought of the name because everyone else in the band was German.
It was the first taste of the fact that the industry is pretty tough.
Yeah, I'm here to testify to the fact that, in the 70s, the record industry was very tough. You got no idea.
Well, about this time you came back to Australia. Let's look at what life was like for you.
Australia was still reasonably conservative, and I'd come out of 5-6 years living in free love and hippie, free will and kind of community, which was Europe. I kept getting knocked back job after job. I was still too young and rebellious to want to cut my hair. I thought, stuff that. As we all know, record companies all want to jump on bandwagons. So 1972 was the year of the singer-songwriter. Hey, we've got to get us one of those. And within less than another week, I was signed to Festival Records. I'm living in the 70s. They also gave me the latitude to be able to record a very credible album. Definitely went pop songs. That's why I didn't get this annoying pressure to come up with some sort of bubblegum. Prussian Blue literally sold about 2,500 copies, which was not too shabby, but not too great for that day and age. So then Festival began putting enormous pressure on me to come up with a hit single. This really rubbed me up the wrong way. It was just not what I wanted to do.
Well, you just recorded another album.
Yeah, I've just done the other album that's just finished now.
What's the name of that one?
Girls on the Avenue.
Girls on the Avenue, right. And that's the big single from the album.
Girls on the Avenue.
Yeah, Girls on the Avenue, in a way, did me a lot of good because it definitely put me on the map, except it put me on the map in the wrong place. It was somewhere I didn't want to be, which is being a pop star. I'd grown to love Australia, but not the Australian music industry. So one day, I just went out, got myself a ticket to go back to Berlin and virtually wrote the entire Goodbye Tiger album. I just said, you know, I'm not going to come back and I'm not going to put up with this, you know, come up with a hit single or else. Because I owed Festival Records one more album and they just gave me complete artistic latitude. I think the orders on it were gold before we'd even started mixing it. It was the whole pub rock culture in Australia, and because you were playing to audiences who were largely drinking quite heavily, and you just tended to become part of the fabric of this wonderful subculture. And I must admit, I think it probably made me a better performer because the sensitive, shy, introverted, poetic persona wasn't going over all that well, to be honest. It was, you know, when I come out and I was bloody rock, yeah.
Your mates in those days called you Ralph. Who was Ralph?
Well, everyone's got to have an alter ego, you know. Michael Chugg was my manager. He really turned me into Ralph on stage. And I'll never forget it because he had a bottle of Courvoisier and he was pouring it down my throat. And there were hecklers, you know, in the audience. You know, because I was going, so, ladies and gentlemen, you know, so I wrote this song about, and Chuggy's going, tell him to, you know what I mean. And from that moment on, rock and roll Ralph was born.
Different persona.
Oh, very different persona.
And a kind of a universe away from who you were. And in a way, that's kind of been a struggle, hasn't it? Because the commercial industry had certain expectations of how to turn you into a star, which you didn't really want much of.
No, but you know, like having this alter ego can actually be a really good thing. It's something because you're able to separate your true self, and then you know, so you have this entertainer called Ralph. So I've walked this sort of tightrope throughout all these years of trying to write fairly serious songs, which could be very kind of draining. You know, if I didn't have my alter ego, which is
Jekyll and Hyde.
It is very exactly Jekyll and Hyde.
During this time, unexpectedly, your dad turned up at an award you were given, at an award ceremony.
I'm not sure if anyone's... I think I'm the only sort of, how should I put it, rock act that ever received an Australia Council grant. But it was in the newspapers and all the rest of it, and so therefore validated my existence. And so suddenly my father, who'd disowned me all those years before, and I'd never, you know, never seen or heard from him for a long, long time, suddenly turns up out of the blue, and it was just like, right, you know. So, okay, so I'm valid now, am I? You know, my existence is validated.
Richard, a musical future in the US beckoned.
It did, and I went charging across the United States and learnt a lesson that I've passed on to, you know, successive generations, which is that if you sign a record deal here in Australia for the world, that means you're powerless to actually negotiate your own deals elsewhere.